Hello, everybody, and welcome to Inclusively. I am Monica Paolini from Sense of Healy, and I'm your host, and the co-host is Chris Lewis at Lewis Inside. And today, our guest is Rupert Baines, who I'm known forever. And he has been doing all sorts of things, but he is now the chair at the UK Tin Semiconductor Expert Groups, among other things. And so we're going to talk about inclusion in mental health today. So maybe, Rupert, why don't we get started and tell us who you are and how you got into this?
Okay, so hello everybody. Yeah, I'm Rupert, been around the startup industry, mostly around telecoms, for quite a long time. As Monica said, I'm doing a project for UK government on technology strategy around semiconductors and telecoms. And I've also been CEO of several entities. Through some of that, we were talking, Monica and I were talking earlier about sort of neurodiversity, disability, mental health. And I think it's just an incredibly important subject for the industry, for the wider industry, and for people in general that doesn't get enough attention, doesn't get enough activity. And I think that's something that we're going to be discussing over the next few minutes.
It
Yeah,
is,
so
and Rupert, thank you for joining us. Because within Inclusively, we've tried to look at, obviously we're mainly telecom focused, but it broadens quite a lot whenever we have these discussions. But we've done it on the basis of who ends up being excluded from the benefits of being connected, and how things are often designed for the so-called center of the market. And we often say politically incorrectly that we design it for the white Anglo-Saxon polo shirt wearing male, as the target market. Whereas in fact, myself as a blind person, we've always had these ugly assistive tech add-ons to it, and we have an opportunity now to design things in from scratch, which accommodate, I think was the word you used in when we had the conversation, is to accommodate all of these different use cases. And I know certainly when I did the original research about 10 years ago about the number of disabled people, and it's about 1 billion people in the world with different disabilities, but it's very hard to put a handle on the neurodivergent, on the cognitive, on any mental health issues. And yet we know that anything we do which excludes people is just going to make it more of a challenge. So yeah, we're really interested in it from your point of view, your experience through work, and other experience about how you see it, and what your view is on it.
I mean, I think that's entirely right. I mean, one of the things we did when we were doing this UK Tin project for the government, we also looked at what's going on in lots of other countries and critical issues and problems for the industry, and what does the industry need to succeed. And one thing that came up screaming red headlights just about every time was the issue of skills and the skills shortage. And there's various factors to this and contributors to this, but to a huge degree, we as an industry, the wider industry, technology industry in general, is wasting a huge amount of talent through, I don't know quite how you put it, excluding minorities, ignoring certain sectors, refusing to accommodate people who, if you made some sensible moves, you would be able to recruit very, very good people who would add a lot to your organization, but they're just not there. And that starts very, very young. If you look at the skills pipeline, the technology industry not just caters to white males wearing polo shirts, it only recruits white males wearing polo shirts because they're the ones who go to university to study engineering, caricaturing, exaggerating, and you do have some minorities. But the percentage of female students studying electronic engineering in the UK is about 14%. and it hasn't increased in the last 3 decades. That's a huge amount of talent that's being wasted. And then we go on to, what about neurodiversity? What about disability? And how many of those are we excluding, and the talent that is being wasted?
Well, so somebody did a study. I mean, this was not about telecoms, but like the cost of, for instance, depression.
Yeah.
And so depression is something that clearly affects you personally, and that's bad in itself. But if you just look at it from the purely economical, not moral, we're not trying to do anything good here, but just the cost to society or to the economy, it's huge because those people are not able to work. They require care. They get, so it's not just trying to, I mean, you want to be good anyway, but even if you're not trying to be good, it's just a huge cost. And as you say, exclusion is expensive,
Yeah,
aside
absolutely.
from not being desirable or good or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah,
It's
but
just,
the morality is certainly there, and we should be conscious of that. But if we just ignore morality and we just talk about the bottom line, the decisions we make have implications, and we can do a lot of, as I say, ignoring any moral good. We can do financial good by approaching these things differently.
so how did you, on a personal level, this is not your daily job. So how did you get interested in this?
Some of this has been as a boss, as a CEO, as an employer, and you know, working in technology, you have a lot of neurodivergent people, and we're actually reasonably used to that. But speaking to people in other sectors and realizing how differently they handle things, and just thinking, therefore, you can do it better. But also people who've had issues, over the years, team members who've had depression or substance abuse or what have you, and how, as a boss, is it possible, to what degree is it possible to support them, accommodation, do things. And this is where you sort of get this, I mean, Chris, we were talking about earlier, to a degree, it doesn't matter if it's neurodivergent or mental health or a physical disability. They all come back to, can you make a accommodation? Can you support someone so that they can be part of the team and they can be contributing? And what is that support and accommodation going to look like? And the same is true for mental health. There are things you can do that will be very positive, and yet a lot of people just don't think about them.
What things did you find useful?
I think it's, a lot of it is just recognizing that people are different. They have their unique requirements. So it might be someone who, I mean, again, coincidentally, we've got better of this through hybrid working, but it's things like, someone who's autistic and has sensory overload, just don't put them in the middle of a cube farm with lots of noise going on all around them, because it'll exhaust them and they won't have any energy to do their work. Just find a quiet
and also, Rupert, don't put them on Teams meetings where there's so many flashing things going off. Like,
yeah, exactly.
Get them to join, but if you want to join just by voice, just join by audio.
Exactly. And saying that and making it clear that that's accepted and perfectly valid. Or, they, we're using one of those AI things, have the AI running in the background and they can read the transcript afterwards rather than trying to keep up with 40 people all interrupting each other. Just recognizing that some people will get very stressed, and you need to, realize that. It's not rocket science, a lot of this. It's just being human and thinking about things a little bit.
It is, and there's two levels to what you just said, which I think are important. On the one hand, it's how do people prefer to communicate, and on the other hand, how do they prefer to consume content? So there's both sides of that. Obviously, we now have the opportunity with the stuff that we've got, and obviously topped up with AI, that you can consume it, like you say, reading captions. You know, I mean, in my situation, obviously I can't read it. It gets read out to me in different ways. And in the telecom world, you know, all the contact center world don't make people, you know, use the digital connection, but actually give them a chance to phone and speak to a human to be able to do it. So I think the opportunity is there to adapt the services around the individual. And I think as we keep saying, you know, we're all individuals. We all have our quirks in the way that we want to do things, whether that's because of a disability, a condition, or that's just our preference, right? So we never used to have the choice because we were very rigid in the way things were done, either the process in an office environment, you know, or the technology was more restrictive. And now the sort of the permutations are there to I think really adapt and make that accommodation. And I think obviously I use the blind example a lot, you know, where one of the original jobs for blind people was operating the Strowger phone exchangers, you know, because
Oh, was it? I didn't know
because
this.
they could physically move the plugs around in an office, you know. So
Okay, yeah.
and of course now I say, well, okay, in a contact center you can employ blind people. There is actually a contact center company in Florida that has 40% of its employees are blind or visually impaired, because they can use the assistive technology to do. They can hear the scripts. They can do everything. So
Yeah.
adapting like that is definitely on. And then we even have sign language provided, you know, over a video link for people with hearing problems. So yeah, we can adapt the technology around it, but you've got to be, the start point is you've got to be aware of it. Management has to be aware of the people and the accommodations required. So yeah, fully agree with that.
And that
Well,
actually,
and I guess that also there is the other aspect that once you understand what is, you know, the you know, the situation of a person, you'll be able to contribute better to one thing or another. So in some cases, a disability can be an asset in the sense that it might help you do something. So you also, in one way you accommodate, but also in another way you can sort of direct to what you can do better, because we all kind of, we're able to do something better than something else. So might as well do that, you know.
absolutely. I mean, yeah, just two examples. I mean, the historic, Chris, you were saying about, you know, blind people. I mean, historically, there was piano tuners. Everyone had pianos, and you know, really, you don't need to be able to see. But you know, we're in a tech world where, you know, huge portion are neurodiverse somewhere on the spectrum, and as an industry, we respect that and take advantage of it. But in other dimensions or other industries, that isn't necessarily the case.
So maybe we can go and talk a little bit about how the technology is helping. And so there's a lot of talk about how AI, because AI can help you sort of be able to consume content, but also to generate other content or whatever you are trying to do in your work.
I mean, this is something we spoke about a little bit earlier, and I think this is going to be very, very interesting. I think, yeah, I said earlier, there's a lot of hype about AI, there's a lot of backlash, and as always, the reality is somewhere in the middle. But there are a lot of applications where AI is, for this kind of thing, incredibly powerful. Being able to read lots of content, synthesize it, the incredibly good now. You know, the speech to text and text to speech are amazingly human. You know, different accents, sarcasm, all sorts of things that, you know, compared to the robots you had a few years ago. But I saw a demo of something the other day. I was talking to a startup that's doing it, which is sign language. And robotic sign language at the moment, automated sign language at the moment, is unbelievably robotic. It's not quite spelling words out one at a time, but it is word, word, word. And this startup's got an AI that can do fluent sign sentences and paragraphs with emotion that are, you know, the way it flows through.
So that's that's a translation issue, which is I think it's a really good application of it, because it's taking all that information, turning it into another form of communication.
Yeah.
Which, you know, so that once again, it's allowing someone to consume it in the way which is suitable for them. You know, I mean, a simple example for, you know, large print. You know, The number of people who tell me they struggle with the size of font on their phone, I go, well, why don't you use the magnification function? Well, we didn't know it existed.
Yeah.
But, so just making it just easy to consume. Actually, there was another example I wanted to mention to you. Obviously, I go to Moorfields, the big eye hospital here in London, to have my retinas poked, not literally poked at, but virtually poked at. And they've now sucked in so many retina scans, which and using AI to pick out patterns at different stages of development of retina degeneration, because the surgeon would do that, but obviously the surgeon's looking at it on a one-off basis. To do it through AI, through the power and scale of compute, is going to pick up patterns much well, just that humans would never pick up. So I think that diagnosis side of it, I think is, and I suspect, any thoughts on that, on the sort of mental health?
Well, I think as you say, the diagnosis side, just because of the, you think any surgeon or any consultant, how many eyes they look at, it's, I don't know, how many thousands or tens of thousands, whereas an AI can be looking at hundreds of thousands, millions, and across a whole variety of different things. And just, we're going to be able to draw from that. The same is true for radiographers. The same is true for the pathologists.
Yeah.
And I was reading something a little while ago. I think the same is going to be true for mental health diagnoses, because what we're talking about, the things AI is being used for in that case, is pattern matching, it's pattern recognition, it's drawing on experience. And again, the number of patients a psychiatrist can hear compared to the number of patients that an AI can hear, and draw on all of those and recognize, affect, speech patterns, tone, word choice, to a level of sensitivity and a level of experience. Now, that's not going to replace a human doctor. That's not going to replace your surgeon or the psychiatrist, but it is going to be the co-pilot who's going to be able to say, did you notice the tone they spoke in? Did you notice that particular pattern of word choice? That's a bit of a warning sign for such just feeding information to medical professionals.
Yeah, and it could be a very helpful thing at the beginning where, there's not that many, the healthcare professionals are limited. So,
exactly.
And it's expensive. So it's a good way to get into, like the preliminary diagnosis. So on top of being accurate.
Yeah. Well, I'll give you another great example. And one thing we always say, Rupert, of course, is that we talk about the disabled and the not yet disabled, because we all pick up disabilities.
We're all getting there. Yeah,
exactly. And there's one thing. Unfortunately, my hearing's going in my right ear, so I'm
that's a bit of a
hearing aids and the like. Yeah, not a good combination. But what I do notice with other people is, if you notice people speaking more loudly than usual, it's quite often because their hearing's not that good. They're compensating for their own lack of hearing by speaking more loudly. So I'm finding that in many of my peers who are in their 60s and 70s now.
Yep.
So you're sitting around going, oh, I think you might have you had your ears tested recently? So yeah, I think there's all these things could easily be picked up, and the scale.
But there is also another thing with people that start not being able to hear much. You hear that those people, they start isolating themselves, because when they go to, say, a dinner and whatever, they cannot hear. They don't understand necessarily what the problem is, because the decline is low, but they feel like they're not really part of the thing. And so that's where it actually is important to get to be able to have this kind of early diagnosis, to say it's not you. Well, your ear is like something more specific that you can fix.
These things feed off each other. So, a lot of respect. Have you read the Atul Gawande book? Well, he's written several. The business one he's really famous for is the Checklist Manifesto, which is really good. But he's written a couple of others that are medical. He's a medic, and he's written a couple of others that are more medical. And he talks about things like just early detection of, for the elderly, walking problems and the fact that their shoes don't quite fit properly and they should be wearing, and that then means their feet are better, which means their posture is better, which means they don't get back problems, but it also means they don't fall. And falling when you're elderly is one of the worst things that can happen. And this, Monica, your point about hearing, if you're going to hear, you go out, you can't join the conversation, you become isolated. That then starts affecting your mood, that starts affecting your mental health, you're getting depressed. And a lot of these things are feedback loops, or there's relationships that might start with something relatively small and easily treated, like wear a hearing aid, wear more sensible shoes, but it end up preventing big consequences.
And I think there's a thing there with it sort of occurs to me the split, isn't it? Because you've got isolation on the one hand, and yet we're bombarded with information, we're bombarded with media, with social media, with stuff on the other hand. And it's if you're feeling isolated and you go even further into the social media world, that can take you down all sorts of rabbit holes. So it's a real challenge for self-identification, for the healthcare, for the social care system to pick up on all of these things. And then because the worst thing is many of the solutions are there to help you, like whether it's a hearing aid. And interesting that the latest AirPod Pros have a hearing aid function.
I was reading about that. Yeah.
But only in the US at the moment. So they're not.
Oh, really?
Okay. Yeah. They don't. You don't see that written very often, but it's only in the US. So I'm going to have to buy some in the US to try over here. But that overlap or convergence of consumer electronics and medical grade stuff is a really interesting. And of course, and that's true for glasses. You look at the Meta glasses with cameras and speakers and stuff in it. So we are gradually bringing these things together, which will help give us that input, give us that ability to create and to communicate. But the isolation bit, I think, worries me more than anything else. Because if people feel isolated, that's when they stop communicating. And we know as a community or civilization that talking to people and interacting is the best way of helping people get through a problem. And I think that mental health issue, if they get pushed to be more reclusive, then that's not going to be good for anybody.
We actually talked a little bit about another aspect of respect back to mental health is the fact that you can actually get all those, kind of social media type of things to basically for therapy. So, so social media could be an isolating factor, could be all sorts of issues. But on the other hand, the fact that you can actually talk to people and that AI is going to be clearly, that's going to be AI based, is that you can have therapy. And apparently for some, especially younger people, being able to talk to a machine, basically, it's actually, they find it comforting. And we can discuss why is that or whatever, but it is actually helpful. And again, it doesn't replace doctors, but where a doctor is actually, you can't afford it, it's not available, or it just, for whatever reason, that might be a good first step.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's, as you say, we're not talking about replacing, technology very often doesn't replace things, it just augments them or supplements them. And there's some amazing, again, I have read some things about talking therapies. Someone I know actually who's sort of mildly depressed, and he uses ChatGPT as a therapist, and it's not clinically really bad, but he just says it's just really helpful. And he knows it's a robot, he knows it's artificial, but just talking through his thoughts, getting it to sound things back, he says it's amazingly good. And it has learned a lot about him and is surprisingly empathetic, to the extent he has to remind himself it isn't real. But it doesn't matter that it's not real, because it's helping and it's doing good.
As long as and that comes back to that idea that as long as people understand that it's not we as industry people who understand many of the moving parts of the technology, we can break it down and analyze it. I guess there is I mentioned critical thinking and how widespread that is. We're not all going to do critical thinking or challenge, what an Alexa says to us or what a robot says to us or something like that. But I think for the mass market, the guardrails around this have got to be quite.
The guardrails are important. The guardrails are going to be really
quite tight.
important.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
In fact, while you were saying that, it did occur to me that my 91-year-old mum, we got her a couple of Alexas and thinking that she'd never used them, and she loves it. It's someone
Really?
to talk to.
Oh, okay.
It's someone to, because she lives on her own. It gives her access to the news and to the and to music and time and stuff and alarms or whatever. But she's actually talking to something, And I think when you live
Really
on
good
your own
idea.
isolation, it's and it will only get better, right? So and I think I've said before, my favorite Alexa application is when I say, Alexa, good night, and all the lights switch off at night. It's very comforting,
Yeah.
Well, and again, it's a question of making sure you use the technology to your advantage and not to your disadvantage. And obviously, every technology can be good and bad, and it is good and bad. But I think that in terms of like again back to mental health, there is a lot that we can do in order to recognize it. So the diagnosis, helping people do whatever, absorb or do things. Interact. So there is a huge opportunity there, but I guess as I say, is also a danger because you have to make sure that people that are mentally ill are also more, they might be less able to recognize the dangers.
There may be, but I think it also goes back to something else, doesn't it? About we talk about we're educated, we've been educated through the technology. Actually, what we have to be really careful with AI in general, and it does apply to the mental health side, is we have to make sure that in terms of the education system, people coming through the different education systems, whether that's regular mainstream or something for a particular disability or whatever, that both the students learning can benefit from it, but also the professionals around it in the education system and in the healthcare system later understand what tools are available to help people feel more included, and whenever I go to the eye hospital, I'm usually educating the surgeons about what technology is now available and how I live and run my life. They don't really have time for it, so there is an ongoing education issue here, which is obviously we want people to come through using AI and benefiting from it, understanding its benefits and its pitfalls, but also wrapping a service around whatever is required help-wise for individuals. So, because a lot of people won't be able to use all the benefits, but as long as the service care wrapped around them are aware of it, that will help enormously.
Yeah, absolutely. We have only a few minutes left, so maybe Rupert, why don't you tell us what is your vision in terms of what's going to happen next? Where are maybe the low-hanging fruits and the kind of longer term prospects?
Oh gosh, that's a big ask for a little Rupert. I think it's really a lot of what Chris was just talking about. I think a lot of the technologies are largely there. I'm worried about some of the guardrails. I think and some of the social side, I think that we need to think those through. But I think it's more, how are we going to take advantage of these technologies? How are we going to socialize them and get them out there? Is Chris's 91-year-old mother going to be using ChatGPT for things? There's use cases that she could do, but how is that going to be made manifest? How do we bring these technologies not necessarily to market, but to widespread use and widespread understanding? I think is the low-hanging fruit. The technologies are now actually pretty amazing.
They are, and I think that there's the business side of it, and we obviously at some point we need to make money from it to keep the business flow going through. But then that societal bit, that education, so people are more aware. People are more aware of all the different ways in which we need to adapt. So hence my inclusive design conversation, that we need to design something from scratch rather than rather than designing an ugly, visually impaired solution that costs a lot of money. And the opportunity is there because it's primarily software plus sensors and compute, obviously, that we should be able to adapt the service around all of our requirements. And as we said, we're all on a spectrum, whether it's a neurodiversity or that gradual disabled effect of things not working as well as they did when we were kids.
Absolutely. So what does long term? We're just gonna get AI to kind of solve all the mental issues.
I
Or
mean, yeah. Do we all end up like Wall-E? The Disney cartoon. That would be the depressing one.
But do you not think that? I mean, we're obsessed about AI at the moment, and the world is, but actually, it will just become part of everything that we do, whether we want to do things physically or virtually, and there will be AI elements in the things we talk to, the devices we use, and what we do. So I think AI will. I don't know how many years' time will just be embedded in things. We won't even call it AI.
I'm sure that I do agree. I think that's right, but I'm not. I mean, this is a whole different conversation. This is moving into the economics and society and big picture. I think it's going to be embedded in much the way that electricity is embedded, or the industrial revolution became embedded, that things had a motive power that was not human powered, and that became embedded into all sorts of things. And they became invisible, but that became a massive transformative change to society. And I think we're going to see something similar, but on fast forward. And heaven knows the Industrial Revolution was disruptive enough. Doing it 10 times faster, being embedded is not in itself a solution. It's going to happen. I agree with you, it's going to happen. But I do wonder what implications that's going to have in a much broader sense.
Yeah, I agree.
That's a different conversation.
Yeah, I think that there is a sort of a somewhat of a difference, because you might have AI that starts being more and more human-like. So I completely agree. There's going to be whatever we do is going to have an AI component to it, just because it's a good tool. It's just a question of when it is going to take over or whatever. But I don't think we're really there yet. But it is going to be a troubling issue on how we as a society would deal with it.
Yep.
And there's no choice. You can't go back. You can't put it. Anyway, Rupert, thank you so much. And Chris, thanks for hosting with me.
Very much. Thank you both.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
And thank you all for listening to us. And do subscribe to the podcast and spread the word if you like it. It's available. The podcast is available on all the major podcast platforms. Thank you so much.